you're interested in ministry or what we would used to call preacher boy and wanting to serve the Lord, man, there you can find a lot of material here in 1st, 2nd Timothy that'll get you pumped up and get you fired up about serving the Lord. And really, that's what Timothy was in many ways. So I love that. There's so many places, so many things that we address from this passage and others like that, Titus and people that Paul is writing to. In this chapter here, he mentions several things that I'll be talking about when it comes to money. And if you think about it, really, throughout the Bible, there's a lot about money. Particularly in Proverbs, there's a whole lot of stuff about wisdom of money and all that. And I want to talk to this afternoon about money problems, okay? Now, we've been doing family, really hitting on the families and relationships and practical information for families. And so it makes sense that I would deal with this one because I've read this, and many of you guys probably know this and have read this before, but they say that the majority of fights that happen in a married relationship have to do with money. Like some way or another, it's revolved around money and money issues. And I find that very interesting. I can see where that comes from. And just to tell you, straight up from my feelings and from where I am, like, as a man, the most stressful thing about money is like when you feel like you're not providing for the family, like there's not enough of it. And let me just tell you, there's never going to be enough. There will never be enough money. Okay, and when you feel so, you can get down as a man, feel like I don't have, my family wants something and I'm not able to provide it. Like that's the most stressful thing to me as a man when it comes to money. But there's lots of reasons that people fight over money. Some of them I can't necessarily relate to because that's not something that we struggle with. Some of them I can relate to because the human flesh and all that. And so I think I can approach this with a little bit of experience. But more importantly, we want to see what the Bible says. And the Bible has a lot to say about money. So I think that it is good to go ahead and to consider it. And first of all, what I like to point out anytime I preach on money is this fact, because I think it's good to remind ourselves this. As Christians, you can get this idea that money is evil, right? And money is not evil. The Bible doesn't ever say that money is a bad thing. In fact, money says a lot of positive things. I mean, the Bible says a lot of positive things about money. We're supposed to work with our hands and provide for our families and all that. And then it just talks about enjoying the fruits of our labor. Okay, let's look at a couple of verses on that. Ecclesiastes 5. Now, anytime you go to Ecclesiastes, you got to remember the context that most of this book is written from the idea of here he's in the flesh and he's thinking about things that are under the sun, meaning like he's talking only about human, like earthly things, carnal things. He's not thinking about what is godly. And obviously he turns to that, especially in chapter 12. You see him saying the conclusion of the whole matter and all. But even throughout the Bible, he makes spiritual applications here. But you got to realize that, he's got a carnal view on some things. But at the same time, he tells us this, even from a carnal perspective. Chapter 5, verse 18. He says, "Behold that which I have seen. It is good and comely for one to eat and to drink and to enjoy the good of all his labor that he taketh under the sun all the days of his life, which God giveth him, for it is his portion." And so, let's go ahead and keep reading. "Every man also to whom God hath given riches and wealth, and hath given him power to eat thereof and to take his portion and to rejoice in his labor, this is the gift of God. For he shall not much remember the days of his life, because God answereth him in the joy of his heart." So anyway, he's saying, even from that perspective of, hey, you know what? Any money that you try to save up or all this kind of stuff, like it's in future generations, who cares? You're going to be dead, And really, a lot of what he writes in this book has to do with, what does it profit you? You can build up this kingdom, and then you're going to have a son that's going to come and destroy it, which is exactly what he had, by the way. And you can have all this, and so everything is vanity, vexation of spirits. That's what he keeps talking about. But even here, he says, you know what? About the only thing you can do is just enjoy the life that you have, enjoy the fruits of your labor. And he said it's a gift from God, and I think he's right. Now, obviously, there are ways in which we can sin by indulging too much on the things that God's given us, or not thinking about others, not caring about others. But in a manner of speaking, like, hey, enjoy it while you got it. Enjoy it, and don't let anybody convince you that it's wrong to have any fun as a Christian, or it's wrong to enjoy something as a Christian. Okay, that's not what the Bible teaches. Obviously, the Bible teaches, like Paul says, like, I've learned to be content with whatever state I'm in. So therefore, if I'm destitute for one reason or another, no fault of my own, or maybe it is a fault of my own, I can get through this. God's going to help me get through this, and I can just be as happy eating rice and beans as I am eating at a restaurant. You know what I mean? Because I'm just going with the times and waiting for God to, and I'm working hard. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, and I'm just trusting that God's going to provide for me. That's not a bad way to live, as long as you can handle the bad times. You know what I mean? And then just not let the good times get you to a point where you're so selfish-minded and you're not serving the Lord. But the money itself isn't the problem. In fact, you're supposed to, feel free to enjoy that. 1 Timothy chapter 6, which is what we just read. Look at verse 17. Charge them that are rich in this world, that they be not high-minded, nor trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God, who giveth us richly all things to enjoy. Okay, so he's saying right there, like, charge them that are rich in the world. In other words, here's the advice for those who are rich. So is it wrong for them to be rich? No. I mean, they didn't do anything wrong. In fact, they probably did a lot of right things in order to have what they have. But he's saying, hey, here's what you need to tell them. Don't be high-minded. Don't trust in your riches. They're uncertain. Don't think of yourself more highly than you ought. And he says, trust in the living God, who giveth us richly all things to enjoy. And so the things that you've got, enjoy them, but don't make the, having things the priority. And I'll be talking about that more in a minute, obviously. Like I said, the book of Proverbs gives a whole lot of wisdom about how to, be wise in our money. And you can't come away from reading Proverbs without thinking, like, well, it must be okay and even right to increase and to abound and to have, wealth to some degree, because it's over all this wisdom that he's given us is telling us how to be wise with our money and how not to do this and not to be lazy and not to, it talks even about debt and not going into debt and all these things that we can gain from that. Well, then it must not be wrong to have the money. It's just wrong to have it and to sin, with it, which is true for everything, right? I talked about recently about how it's not a sin to be angry. But the Bible says, be angry and sin not. And so there's something that you can do with that anger that would become sin. It's the same thing with money. Money itself's not bad, but you could do things with that money or allow it to control you and get to a point where it is a problem. So there are a lot of wealthy people in the Bible that are mentioned who do great things for the Lord, and they're not condemned for the fact that they have money. Anytime there's somebody that's condemned, it's because they're trusting their money and they're making their money the main things and ruling over God's people, and that makes them evil people. So what does it say in verse 10 of our chapter here? It says, "For the love of money is the root of all evil." Go back to verse 4. Well, let me say this first before we start reading at verse 4. So for the longest time, I always heard the love of money is the root of all evil. And it's kind of a hard pill to swallow, because it's like, there's a lot of evil in this world. And I'm thinking about all the different types of evil. I'm like, how could those be related to the love of money? You know what I mean? Like, how does the love of money cause somebody to do some of the sins that are out there to do? And so, like, I kind of try to figure that out. And here's one thing that I thought, like, if anything, here's what my thought was. If I was going to write the Bible, what I would say is, pride is the root of all evil, because pride, it's our pride that will make us do, whatever sin, pretty much every sin you can link to pride. And then it dawned on me, well, it says that the love of money is the root of all evil. And so I got to thinking like, well, if there's a root, there had to first be a seed from which that root grew from. And I would say, well, that seed is pride. Okay? And in the text, this same text where we find the love of money is the root of all evil, look at verse 4. The whole context is what he's saying, hey, don't listen to these people, right? These evil people that are telling you all these things and teaching otherwise. And here's what it says about these people. He is proud, knowing nothing, but doting about questions and strifes and words, whereof cometh envy, strife, railings, evil surmising. So that envying is part of the pride and all these other things that seem to have nothing to do with money, right? Perverse disputings of men of corrupt minds and destitute in the truth, supposing that gain is godliness. From such withdraw yourself. So again, another aspect of this pride is this aspect that, hey, the only thing that matters, the only way to be, to be good and to be righteous, whatever, is to have money. So then all of a sudden, like that's their goal in life is to have money. And so then he says, but God, let's see, where did I leave off? Verse 6, yeah, but godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. That's why I live paycheck to paycheck, and that's why I'm not really saying that. In fact, I can tell you from Proverbs, like I said, that it's not wise to just spend every last penny that you have. And there's a time for saving, and there's a time for different things. But the reality is, when you're not attached to money, and some big bill comes up or something, it's just like, it's only money. You just spend it, you get that taken care of, and then you hope you can build it back up in the bank, and it's okay. As a Christian, you're not stressed out thinking, oh, I don't have my savings in the bank in my 10 months or whatever they're saying that you have to have saved up. And hey, look, I used to listen to Dave Ramsey. I think he gives some great advice. But I'm not going to get all of my wisdom from Dave Ramsey. I mean, God knows what we need and what we don't need, and He's going to provide for us when we need it and all that. And so we don't have to worry so much about that. So I believe if money is the root of all evil, then the seed from which that root grows is pride. And so this is what he's talking about here. He says, "Let us, having food and raiment, let us be therewith content. But they that will be rich," in other words, it's their desire, it's what they want, which is basically what the love of money means, right? You're desiring, you're going after it. "They that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare and into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows." So needless to say, he's really hitting on the fact that there are people out there who love money and it controls them and it causes all kinds of problems. Okay, so what does that have to do with fights in a marriage concerning money? Well, I would say this, that all of our fights, and I say our, not meaning my wife and mine, but all of ours, Christians in our relationship, any fights that we have over money are probably linked to pride. And I'm going to talk about that here a little bit. But think about this. Pride is, and we all struggle with pride. I don't believe there's one person that, doesn't struggle with pride. And that one person who claims to not struggle with pride, you know what? They're proud of themselves for not being prideful. And so it's just inevitable. Human flesh is one of the things that we have to struggle with daily. Okay, but pride is self-love. And when it comes to money, here's how we manifest this. Here's how this pride is manifested. We brag whenever we have a lot. We brag and we want people to see what we have, and we want to showcase it, and hey, look what I have, and spend that in areas that are going to make us look better. That's pride. That's pride, and we all can struggle with that. But then there's another aspect of pride that can come out to the opposite, where if we don't have the money to buy those things that impress everybody, then we just complain and we grumble about not having enough money. Guess what? Still pride. Either extreme is going to be linked to pride, because what we love ourselves and we care about ourselves, and so that causes us to make too much from money. Okay, and then the third thing that how pride manifests itself is with greed. Okay, now I don't believe I'm not socialist or communist or whatever, and Although some of the principles in the Bible, you start reading that and you're like, wow, that sounds kind of like the Democrats, utopia. But the thing is, you have to realize that it's not a government enforcing this. It's people living together in a community who love each other and love the Lord. And they say, hey, you need some help? Let me help you. But it also says if you don't work, you shouldn't eat. And so there's a different aspects on helping each other, who are helping people who are trying to do good and trying to get along, and they fell on some rough times, and you have a little bit of money to help them out, right? But those people who are greedy and stingy, now I'm not talking about people who have a legitimate reason to say like, no, I can't help you out, but people who are stingy with their things, this is a sign of pride. Look at Luke chapter 12. I'll get to the fighting in just a minute. Luke chapter 12, verse 15. Luke 12, 15. And he said unto them, take heed and beware of covetousness, for a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of the things which he possesseth. And he spake of the parable unto them, saying, the ground of a certain rich man brought forth plentifully. And he thought within himself, saying, what shall I do, because I have no room where to bestow my fruits? He was so bountiful, he had so much that he didn't even have a place to store it all. And he said, this will I do, I'll pull down my barns and build greater barns, and there will I bestow all my fruits and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease, eat, drink, and be merry. Now, first of all, I don't think it's necessarily wrong that this guy had plenty. That he was a good farmer. He took care of the lawn. He did the work. He put it in there, and he had great results, and he had an overabundance of food. I don't even think it's necessarily wrong that he pulled down his barns and built bigger barns so that he had a place to house all that stuff. The thing is, this is all he cared about, and he didn't care about spiritual things. That's really what this is talking about. And so it says, but God said unto him, thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. Then whose shall those things be which thou hast provided? So is he that layeth up treasures for himself and is not rich towards God. So he's saying, like, hey, don't make all life about just laying up treasures and establishing this dynasty and having all the set and ducks in a row and all that kind of stuff financially, and then just leave out the most important thing, which is serving God. He said, put your focus on serving God, and here's what you find out. People that put their focus on serving God, the money's really not that important, and they're more likely to help people out whenever they need something. And they'd probably say, you know what? Man, I've got such an abundance here, that I'm going to bring a whole bunch of peppers and give them to Kansas City Mission. I'm going to bring a whole bunch of, I'm just saying that's the attitude that's just like, man, I got an abundance here. Let me give some away. You know what I mean? It's not that you have to do that because this is a socialist community or something like that. It's just because you want to help out. And you're like, well, I got plenty. I got more than we can eat. You could either build bigger barns, or you could just give it away, or go ahead, or do both, whatever. So the emphasis is here that he was a prideful person who didn't care about the Lord, but only cared about his stuff. That's the main issue. Okay, so let's talk about how pride causes us to have money problems and why spouses will fight about money, okay? I got 3 points here. Surprise, surprise. 3 points about different ways in which our pride causes us to have fighting and stuff in a marriage relationship, okay? So number one, this is obvious. Because of pride, which, the love of self, right? Because of pride, we want stuff that money can buy, all right? Most of us don't want money just so that we have a lot of zeros, one with a whole bunch of zeros just so we can look good. No, we want the stuff that money buys. Right? Money's not going to do me so good just in the bank if I can't spend it on something. And so what it really is that we just lust after things. We covet after things. And so it causes us to just start looking at everything with this idea like, I want that. And look, our body is designed in such a way where it starts sending off signals that say, hey, I need some of that. I need some of that. And, this is why we can get addicted to so many different things, sweets and caffeine and all these kinds of things, because we've now told our body that this is good, and then our body's like, hey, I need more of that. And the next thing you know, we're controlled by that impulse, for these things. And there's obviously there's a lot better scientific explanation about that, but you get the point. And so our impulses can easily control us, and we can get out of control to the point where, look, somebody that's on drugs will kill somebody. Literally kill somebody just for like a bag of drugs. And like in their right mind, they would never do something, but that impulse becomes so strong because of this desire, this covetous, for whatever reason they have it, whatever has controlled them to do that. But that can be anything. You can get a shopping addiction. There are people that are just addicted to shopping and buying stuff that they don't need and hoarding stuff in the garage or whatever. And it's just like, well, it was on sale. I got a good deal. I saved this money. That was only 50% off. Well, we didn't need it. You know what I mean? And that's something that could happen just because there's something within us. There's a gratifying nature, whether it's endorphins or whatever, that control us. And as Christians, we shouldn't be controlled by those things. We should have temperance, which would stop us from having that. And so therefore, look at Proverbs 23. Proverbs 23. Dopamine was the word I was looking for. If you ever studied on how that works and controls the brain, I guess that has to do with endorphins as well. But Proverbs 23, verse 4. Labor not to be rich, cease from thine own wisdom. Okay, and so there's a ton of verses like this that are saying, hey, don't seek after those things. Can you give me water? And don't give yourself to following these types of things. We should be content with whatever we have. Again, it doesn't mean that we don't have a responsibility to go work and to provide for our families and all that. And should the Lord give us a promotion and we have more money to do things, none of that's wrong. But don't let that be your desire and your focus, and don't let that get you to the point where you're not content. Where you are, you just constantly want more. Now, the opposite of this would be working an honest living to be able to provide for your family. That's not pride, right? Because you're literally thinking about your family. I need to provide for them. Or saying, hey, I have an abundance of things, praise the Lord. I can use that to help my Christian brothers and sisters, and I can provide in different ways. But when pride is involved, you will be upset when other people are spending the money that you could be spending on yourself. Do you see where I'm going with this? So in a married relationship, most of the time, if there's a fight involved because somebody doesn't have the stuff that they want, this could be the husband or the wife, okay? Obviously, it could go either way. And they don't have what they want, and the other spouse is spending a little bit too much money on themselves, and so therefore I don't get what I want, then all of a sudden there could be this fighting. But you see how that's all still linked to pride? And it's very common. And some people, I think part of it is just never grew up. You know what I mean? They were at home, maybe a little spoiled, they got whatever they want, and then they enter into a married relationship, and it's like, wait, I can't get whatever I want anymore? I had to actually share, or I got to actually provide, and I got to, and so we got to be really careful that our focus isn't on gratifying ourselves, gratifying our flesh. And obviously, you got to live within your means, and so some people have the opportunity to gratify themselves, their flesh, more than others, and that is in many ways more dangerous because it's going to be harder and harder for them to control themselves and have the temperance because they've got plenty of money to do with whatever they want. And so sometimes when a person loses a job or something happens where they have less money, it could actually be a blessing for the family. Believe it or not, they get to this point where they're just like, you know what? We're trusting the Lord more than we ever have. We're not focused on all these, fleshly things anymore, and it could actually be a blessing. But a lot of times the fighting has to do, the root cause of that is that pride, thinking, well, I want this, I want that. And so they're not happy because they don't get that for whatever reason. That will cause a fight in married couples. Number two, because of pride, we want control of the money. Now, I'm sure in some ways these could overlap a little bit, but what I'm getting at here is that sometimes it isn't necessarily about having stuff or gratifying the flesh as far as like, hey, I want more stuff. Maybe you're content, you got whatever you want, but there's something that doesn't sit well with one person in the relationship having control of the money. And they made a purchase and they didn't tell you or something like that. And that could be the cause or the source of some fighting because one part of the relationship doesn't have control of the money. Look at John chapter 12. I always thought this passage is pretty interesting. John chapter 12. And we'll start reading in verse 3. John 12:3. Then took Mary a pound of ointment of spikenard, very costly, and anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the odor of the ointment. I don't know how expensive that is. I've heard people estimate or give different figures as to how expensive it was. Super expensive is all the implication is. Then saith one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, which would betray him. Every time they mention Judas' name, it's always like it's a long list of the one that betrayed Jesus. And why was not this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? This he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and had the bag and bare what was put therein. Now, I've read that a lot in the past and thought well, what does it mean about him being a thief? Was he wanting that money to be sold so that there's more in the bag so that later on he can come dip in the bag and nobody knows about it? That's possible, But another way of reading that is to say, he was a thief and he had a thief's heart. And so therefore, he certainly didn't care about the poor. Hey, we need to give to the poor. No, he had a thief's heart. And so he's like, you know what? If we're giving to the poor, then I don't benefit any from this money. And so he's like, you know what? You should give that to the Lord, give that to the church, put that in the offering plate. And then we could, give it to the poor. And what he's really hoping is, there'll be another feast day that he can take part in, or there'll be something, I don't know. Obviously, a person that has the heart of a thief, is probably would take it if he had the opportunity to. I mean, if he would betray Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, he certainly wouldn't be out of reach for us to think that he would steal from the bag. But I think the idea there is that he had a thief's heart, and he certainly didn't care about the poor. But he is criticizing somebody, making himself look good and justifying making it sound good, saying what are you doing? She could have put that, and he had control of the bag, which is a terrible verse for anybody who's a treasury of the church. It's just you know what? Here's how much God thought about finances. Jesus put Judas in charge of the money. Right? I've always loved that mindset because it's who cares? It's just money. Jesus can put a coin in the fish's mouth. You know what I mean? Jesus can multiply the fish and the loaves, right? Why do we even need money if we're following Jesus? But there was this purse that they had. It did have money in it. It had a significant amount of money in it so that they can take care of what they needed to and buy what they need to. And Judas was the one that had control of that. And he wanted control, and it's pride that causes us to want control. Now, when we got married, I was and still am terrible at money. And it's terrible at accounting. Imagine that. Terrible at record keeping and all that stuff. And Valerie was, she's good at school and mathematical, and she loves organizing those kinds of things, and she can figure out, charts and stuff. And so I was like, well, it makes sense that you will control the money. And it wasn't but like a couple months into our marriage that I said, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and take over the money. It wasn't that she did anything wrong. It was so much stress on her. And she's just like, I don't want this stress. And it was like, there certainly wasn't a fight over, who controls the money, but it was just like, I think it's as the head of the house, it makes better sense for me to be the final say in what we spend. And here's the thing, I just need to be open with her and talk about what we have and what we can spend and all those kinds of things. And I'll get to the next point in a minute that, again, overlaps with that a little bit. But sometimes our fighting in a relationship is based on the fact that somebody wants the control of the money. And again, it comes back to, it's kind of like Judas thinking like, hey, if that person controls the money, then maybe they're going to make a purchase that I don't know about. And if they make a purchase that I don't know about, then how do I know that money is going to be there whenever I need it? You see how it always comes back to this prideful love of self. And then we've already talked about the roles of the husband and the wife and all that. And the wife, as hard as it might be to trust your husband that might not seem like he's got it together or whatever, like when you just release that and you submit, you say, hey, I'm submitting to my husband as unto the Lord because, God told me to, and I love God, and he knows what he's talking about. And so I'll go ahead and let the husband be the head of the house. First of all, it should be a load off of the wife because now she doesn't have to be stressed out about that stuff. And if it works out in your house that the wife is in charge of finances, I'm not saying that's necessarily wrong. I'm just saying like she has to be in a role, biblically speaking, where she's submissive to the husband. So he should have the final say of what's going to be spent. I remember reading something a while back. I think I mentioned it here when we were, I don't remember what the message was about really, but we're talking about people who left fundamentalism. They're independent fundamental Baptists, but then usually it was kids, and then the kids grew up, and now they're like anti-fundamentalists, like going on, starting these websites and everything on people who have come out of the independent fundamental, how mistreated they were and all that stuff. And so there are all these stories that people wrote about something that they saw whenever they were independent fundamental Baptists. And most of them were laughable because you could tell it was just irate people that were trying to find something bad. And look, there are wicked people everywhere you go. And so you're going to find people that do bad things. But in this case, one of these ladies was talking about her family. And she was like, I'll never forget the day I was so embarrassed because we went through the checkout, and after my mom got the total of what the bill was, she said, oh no, that's more than I thought it was going to be. Hold on for a minute, I need to call my husband. And she called her husband, and we're talking it was only like a couple dollars over or something like that. And she called her husband. And the person that was writing this out was saying it was just like the most terrible thing, and she was so embarrassed, and how could, they think that she can't even make that kind of a decision. She needs to call her husband. And so right there in the checkout, she called her husband and said, is it okay if I spend a little money? And this person was so embarrassed. And I'm reading this thing saying, sounds to me like she was a good woman. It's not because he needed to like control her and how dare you spend $1 more than what I told you to. But she's like, I just want to make sure it's okay. I mean, maybe if she would have spent that extra $1, it would have bounced and she would have overdraft. Who knows? But, she's like, I'm just going to trust my husband. And so she called and said, hey, I know you said we can only spend such and such amount. And so there's a sign of somebody who has no pride because they're just like, whatever. If you want to control it, you control it. In fact, not if you want to. The Bible says that you're the head, and so you tell me, what can I do? Now, every relationship, you're going to kind of come to some of your own terms and some of your own agreements. My wife and I, for instance, are super generous about that. Everything we have is kind of linked together anyway. So, so here's an example. So like nowadays, everything, you put it on a card and it goes through like Square or whatever, and gets an email, right? Where our emails linked together. So if I get an email, she sees it on her phone. I'm not telling you have to do it that way, but I'm just saying that's just the way we ended up. Like you can see whatever you want of my history or whatever. And so our email is kind of linked that way. She gets my notification from my email. So the problem is if I go buy a coffee for $5, which is ridiculous, ding, she sees it. She knows that I just bought a coffee. And so she's like, did you enjoy that coffee? Just kind of joking, because she knows that I probably didn't know that she was going to see that. And so she sees it. And so, but you imagine that some people could be like so controlling that was like, how dare you make that purchase without telling me? And I don't think anybody in here is like that. But, our relationship is just like, hey, if the money's there, we can spend it to some degree. It's okay. It's all right. And we'll call each other and make sure, hey, there's nothing out there. You haven't bought some kind of major thing that's going to, that I didn't know about that's going to, so we don't really have that. But my wife will often, like if she's wanting to buy something, anything substantial, she'll be like, hey, we talked about such and such, and I need to get this, and is it okay if I do that? And you know what? Almost, I was going to say 9 times out of 10, but almost 100% of the time, I'm like, sure, go ahead. I'll just work some extra. No, I'm just kidding. It's just like we certainly don't have any stress when it comes to that kind of stuff. Now, like I said, the only time you're stressed is whenever you don't have money and like the washing machine breaks or something like that. And so God provides. But sometimes the fights are based on the need, somebody's need. They feel like they need to control the money. And let me just say this. Back to Judas. So manipulating somebody to not spend money so that you will have money whenever you want it is pretty much the same as stealing, right? And he was a thief, and so that's why he had that mindset. It's like, hey, let me talk you out of spending that because really I want it. Does that make sense? And so you don't want that heart that's like, I can't let anybody else spend something because of your pride and because you want to have stuff. Now, I'm not talking about needs. As a family, you need to establish what we need and what's like a general budget or whatever to make sure that the bills are paid and all that stuff. I'm not talking about being stupid with your money. I'm just talking about not being so controlled by money and so eager to control the money, from the other partner or whatever, that it controls you to the point where you're fighting. And you're mad at each other all the time because of money, probably stems from pride, which again, is something that we all have in our flesh and we all struggle with, but we want to control that as Christians. And so we don't want to get to the point where our money problems are based on the fact that we want to control the money. And the last thing is this: because of pride, here's where a lot of fights will happen. Okay, because of pride, we will hide money practices that would embarrass us if people found out about it. Okay, we don't want people to know about those embarrassing things, and so that will cause us to hide. All right, I'll give you an example. I already mentioned the coffee thing. So if I know that she's, it's going to sound so silly, but hey, we all got silly things that we got to get out. We got to get into the open air, okay? So my wife will know if I buy a coffee, right? Well, one day I want to buy a coffee, and I'm like, man, I don't want her to think I'm just throwing money away. And so I'll just pay for this with cash so she doesn't know. And I'm not saying this has ever happened. I get my wallet out and I'm like, oh man, I don't even have $5. I need to go to the ATM so that I can get some money out. And then they charge me like $1. And so see how silly that would be, but we'll do that kind of stuff because we don't want our spouse to know that we're making a frivolous purchase or something like that. Well, here's an idea. Don't make the frivolous purchase. Go home and make your own coffee, or just, talk about it or make sure that it's there or whatever. Just don't stress about those kinds of things. But this is a huge area that'll cause people to fight because you'll find out that your spouse has hid something from you. All right. Since I'm telling on myself, there was a time in Oklahoma City where I got a speeding ticket. I've gotten lots of tickets, okay, in my life. I got a speeding ticket. I'm not doing a good job as a pastor here, leading the flock here, but got a speeding ticket. And we were hurting at that time, struggling a little bit financially. And it was just like, oh man, that's going to cost so much money. I'm so embarrassed, blah, blah, blah. And then later on, I got another speeding ticket. After we had this conversation, that costs so much money. We don't have that much money to give out and all this stuff. So we had a conversation. I wouldn't say a fight. But later on, I got pulled over again. And it was like, oh man, I don't want to tell my wife that I got another ticket. So guess what I did? I'll just pay that. She'll never know about it. I'm in control of the money anyway. And I'll just pay that whenever I got the money. I won't tell her about it. Problem is, I was a pretty busy guy back then. I mean, I'm a pretty busy guy now too, but pretty busy, forgot about the ticket. She got the police knocking on her door one day, and she opens up, what are the police? And what do the police want? And they're like, there's a warrant out for your husband's arrest because I didn't show up to court to pay my ticket. So my wife calls me and she's like, did you know there's a warrant out for your arrest? I was like, what did I do? I don't know. I'm like, what's it for? Apparently there was a speeding ticket. And I was just like, oh no. I didn't want to tell you because, and so it just made everything worse. And it was all based in pride. Now, we didn't really have a fight about it, I wouldn't say, but I'm just trying to give you like the embarrassing things. See what my wife has to put up with. But, I think all of us probably have stories like that. We don't want people to know these embarrassing things. One of the things I thought about was gambling addictions. Now, I don't understand whenever I go to the gas station and have to wait for somebody to go through the line and put in all their, I'm just like, oh. As soon as I remember when the stimulus thing was, people were getting their stimulus checks, and all of a sudden they're all going to the gas station. I want like $400 worth of lottery tickets. I'm just like, come on, people. But again, that goes back to that impulse thing. Something has caused them to think that, well, just maybe I'll hit it big. Maybe I'll get lucky. Now, I just found this out, but I guess that they just legalized like sports gambling. Anybody know about? Okay. I'm behind because I didn't even know that was illegal. I thought people have been gambling on sports for, forever. And then I found out that Kansas, my wife was just looking this up on the way here because I was asking her, what exactly is that about? And she looked it up. And if I understand right, Kansas is just like the second state to legalize it. Now, I don't even think it should be illegal, right? I just don't think we should do it. But I don't even understand why it's illegal to begin with. And I started thinking, like, why is it? And maybe somebody can enlighten me afterwards, but why is it illegal? Is it because, because, from what I understand, all the gambling, it's like anytime that there's some kind of major gambling, it's all like the state's got control of it. You ever notice that? Like even the lottery, state's got control of it. Casinos, okay, you can go to a casino, but only if you go to this casino that's run by the state, or however it works out with the reservations, the Indian reservations. I don't understand how all that takes place, but I know there's a lot of places where people can go gambling, and I don't understand. Again, I do think that the government's taking advantage of that and they know that people are addicted to that to the point where they're spending all their money and thinking that they're going to hit it big. I'm going to tell you right now, if there's any chance that they're going to hit it big, the government wouldn't have been behind it anyway. So somebody's making money off of that. But anyway, I mean, you can look how fancy they are and you can tell like, kind of like going to the hospital and you look how fancy that is. Who's getting all this money? Why do they have so much money to have such a nice looking place? But anyway, but gambling is a huge deal. Now, I, again, don't get it. Because I've never been there. Look, I've got plenty of sins and things that, I've struggled with in my life. This isn't one of them, but I know those people who are involved in it, it becomes a very embarrassing thing to them because they know that it's controlled them and they know that, they just have an obsessive, compulsive kind of an idea to do this. And so obviously they're going to start hiding that from their spouse and hiding that from people. I tell you what, that's going to cause some big old fights. And sometimes those fights will turn into talk about divorce even, And so we don't ever want to allow our pride to get us to the point where we're hiding certain practices or whatever because we don't want to be embarrassed, Hiding, didn't pay your bills on time. Those late fees can add up, right? So you don't want to talk about that and you start hiding. Those kinds of things are going to happen. But I'm just saying, your pride can get you to the point where you're always playing cover up and you don't want your spouse to know. But love your spouse and be open with them. You're one flesh. You know what I mean? And you can get through these things. And if they're walking in the Spirit and they're not wanting the control or they're not in pride wanting all the stuff and everything, then you guys can get through a conversation about these things where you don't have to be covering up and keeping your spouse out of the loop. Okay? All of these things stem from the love of money, which is based out of our pride. And so we don't ever want to do that, but as Christians, that's going to be the biggest thing that we fight with on a daily basis is our pride. Let's pray. Lord, I pray that you'll help us to put away pride and particularly when it comes to our loved ones and our friends and family and most importantly our spouses. Lord, I pray that you'll help us not to allow pride to stop us from doing what's right and controlling us to the point of fighting and arguing over silly things and loving money so much that it would tear up our relationships. I pray that you'll help us to realize that money's nothing and you've got all the wealth in the world and you can give us just what we need when we need it. And I pray you help us to be wise and do the best we can to provide for our families, but then also, Lord, that we would just enjoy what we have when we have it and trust you for all things. And I pray that you will give us wisdom as a church and individually as families, that we would live and serve you even in our finances and even in our relationships when it comes to these things. Help us to be able to do that and bring glory to you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, let's stand.